Welcome back. Thank you to my Patreons. I'm going to try and do this exclusive voiceover content as often as possible. And this is my second Canon. This came about because me and John Saunders at NYC CNC had a conversation when I was out there. And I told him I still had some of this material left over from my first Canon. In fact, enough for 2 more Canons. So we split the piece. I gave him half. And this is the second half that I kept. And we kind of had a gentleman's challenge for the meetup that just happened in Ohio. After making the first Canon, where I was a little bit nervous to do all these maneuvers, this went a lot smoother. I had a lot more confidence, but I still made a few mistakes. Right here I drilled this pilot hole way too big for the 1-inch bit. When the 1-inch bit started going in there, it kept grabbing and binding up. And that's primarily because I made the pilot hole too big. I should have kept the pilot hole smaller. Because right now all that's cutting is the very edge of the 1-inch bit. Until it went past the pilot hole, then it went really smooth. But the key, I think, is to make a small pilot hole, not as big as I did. And then it wouldn't have kept binding up. And you see some of that chatter right there at the opening of that hole. A lot of people think that indicates rifling that goes all the way down. It's just a bad cut right at the very beginning. And I'm double checking that the 1-inch ball fits all the way in there. I shouldn't have done that so soon, because if it got stuck I wouldn't have been able to blow it out until I drilled the fuse hole. And now here you see the steady rest. I'm just working on basically the muzzle or the end of the barrel first. And I have a few pictures. Everybody always wonders how detailed I get. I had a few pictures for reference. I usually draw it a couple times. And in the act of drawing it, I begin to understand exactly where the shapes begin and end. The different shapes interact with each other. And I like to use a razor blade on brass because I can get close with the dials. And then with the edge of the razor blade, I can really dial in that curve. And so now I'm making a plug for the barrel. This is the same method I did last time when I made a Canon, but this time everything went a lot more smoother because I've been there. You know, I always say you go to school on the first couple you've done, no matter what it is. If it's moving something up a set of stairs, you go to school on the first set. After the first 1 or 2, then you get much more confident. So now I put that plug in, I flipped the Canon over, and now I'm going to basically use the tailstock with the center hole. It's not a live center, so I had to keep oiling it and also putting a lot of the cutting pressure on there. The center kept wearing out, so I kept having to slightly tighten. You don't want that thing chattering or jumping around at all. And here I indicate where my bands are going to be. It's the bands, I assume they must have done something in the world of Canons at one point. But I think most of the time they're just merely decorative, so that this long piece of material starts to have some graphic breaks in it. I think that's probably really more than any reason why they had them. Somebody can answer me in the bottom. And so I'm using a taper jig. Taper jig allows me to put about 2 degrees in those first 3 segments, and then from the middle segment to the nose is 4 degrees. And then I have to incorporate that curve that I hand cut right at the front. I incorporated that very gently with the razor blade. And now I left the band square for a little while, and then I go back in with a razor blade and then with a chisel, and I give them a little detail which really brings it to life. And I made a mistake here in the back. I misjudged how much material I had on the back. Right there, that band at the end should have been the very most pronounced band according to the style I was copying. In fact, it's not pronounced at all, much less than I really needed it to be. So I just kept digging and digging and digging. So that back section between the bands, I ended up making a little shallower just to make that outer band, which was at the limit of the material, be more pronounced. And I ran out of material, of course, and so I had to make the butt out of a different piece of stock. And since I did not have any more brass in that diameter, I ended up making it out of this chunk of steel. And anytime you cut steel, it's just extremely difficult. You got to take slow bites, and it takes a really long time. So whenever you're going to manufacture anything out of steel on the lathe, sit back, put on a podcast, and just be super patient, because you're going to be there for hours. And I was going through the bins of tools that came with my lathe, and then there was so many convenient tools that I could use to actually make these various shapes I needed to make. You can see they had that rounded cutting head. There was a couple in that same shape but in various sizes. And now to smooth it, I could not use the razor blade on it. I had to use this die grinder. And here I'm making the very end. Now you see I stuck it back on the lathe. I crazy glued it in place just so that I could turn this and incorporate the two shapes at the same time. You see that brass bulge there? I hated that little bulge. I thought I was done, but after looking at it, I started cutting it away, and I get a much more pleasant curve there, in my opinion. And I'm just trying to find it. I'm working it, trying to find it. I don't know exactly what I want until I see it. And now I get to cut that off. I get all the material out from around it, I cut it off, and then I put it back in there and die grind that nipple, so to speak. I just want that to be a nice smooth transition. And you'll see that piece is not, it's really out of whack in there. It doesn't matter as long as it spins fairly concentric. I'm not cutting it with the tool. And there it fits nice and snug. I was real happy about that. And now I'm making my carriage, and I copied a Cannon from Edinburgh Castle that I saw in a picture on Instagram, and that gave me the instant idea to make a simple carriage because I was running out of time. It also gave me an excuse to play with my new plasma cutter. And this is 3/8 inch stock, which looks like an inch thick when it's in the right scale. I always tell everybody, no matter what it is you're making, make sure that your material is of the appropriate scale. A lot of my students make boxes out of flimsy paper or flimsy plastic, and if your box gets bigger, so need the walls of your box to get bigger. So no matter what it is, make sure the material is of the appropriate scale for whatever it is you're making. And here the Bridgeport is set up with the indexing head. I'm going to drill the trunnions, and there I am drilling the trunnions. It's a 2-flute 1-inch cutting head. And some cutting heads don't have the ability to drill a hole. You got to make sure, because otherwise you're just going to burn the middle. There's really no cutting happening right at the center of a lot of bits. You got to be careful if you're going to use a flat end mill. And drilling out the fuse hole. And now I'm making the trunnions. The only piece of stock I had was a 1.5 inch piece. And so you see the piece that's being held in the jaws I already cut down, and I flipped it, and now I'm gonna, because my lathe is old and worn out, I wasn't able to get a perfect match, so that's right where I cut them in half. Everything was off slightly. And no matter what you hold anything in a 3-jaw chuck, if you take it out and put it back in, pretty much almost never get it exactly the same anyway. And there I am. I got a little shoulder on the trunnion to keep the steel carriage in place. And there I am checking the hole. And now I'm just using solder. I'm using a electrical solder. It's not silver solder. Silver solder, I would have had to get this Cannon up to 1,000 degrees or plus. Right here I'm able to locally get that little spot up to a couple of 100 degrees and melt that solder. And it was more than adequate. And now this I did just to bait the trolls. I glued this in, and because of time and because I'm slightly lazy sometimes, and that is E6000, which is an extremely strong glue, and everybody predicted it would blow off, but after 7 cannon blasts it's still there, strong in place. That E6000 glue is incredibly strong for a lot of purposes. And now I'm drilling out these holes, and because the holes were just almost the same exact size as the 1/2 inch cutting head, it didn't cut quite cleanly. It was a bit of a struggle, so I kept having to take light passes until I got to where I needed to be. That's all the holes on the carriage. They're all 1/2 inch, the bolt holes and the axle holes. And there I got where I needed to be finally, after struggling through cutting that with the only 1/2 inch bad cutting head I had. It always seems to be the case. There's always one weak link in the process, and it's 1 in the morning, and you got to figure out how to make it work. These are the wheels. I didn't show it quite explicitly, but it's a cutout loop welded to the cutout rim, and that's how I got that layer. And I started putting the Cannon together, and I realized that this one bolt needed to go right through the airspace where the Cannon would occupy. So I made this little bracket. I just had to take the bolt and put a U in it. It was actually fun incorporating a little bit more stuff into it, which I didn't expect it until I really went to go put it together. I just did not see it until it was right there. And there's no reason to save those few inches all thread. In fact, I could still use them for something, but you get a much cleaner look if you just go all the way through, then cut your excess out later. You know, most people would say, oh, I'm going to cut a 1-inch piece and a 1-inch piece, and then they would never be collinear. Now they're perfect. And I'm bolting it together, and I'm using the cap nuts that I had left over from the bed build I did in January. They're 1/2-inch thread, 3/4 inch bolt hole, 3/4 inch wrench, I should say. And it was bound up a little bit, so I hit it with the hammer off camera. This was a lot of fun putting this together. Right when I got to this point, I was really proud of what I had accomplished, because I was really just working in the dark bit, working off a few pictures. I brought a picture into Photoshop to build the carriage, and that's how I got my scale. So I took a snapshot I found online. And this is all just press fit. That 1/2-inch milling head wasn't quite a 1/2 inch. It was a couple hundred thousandths shy of a perfect 1/2 inch. So it actually gave me the ability to press fit those wheels on. And there we go. I was really happy with it. It was almost right on the money with the original scale. For some reason, those Edinburgh castles have a trunnion axle that is below center. I wasn't going to attempt that. I like it right in the middle there. I think it just makes everything look better. So if you look up these cannons, that trunnion pin is below center, way below center, almost like across the bottom of the cannon. There they are. There's my old one and the new one. I'm at John's shop, and that rear leg is up in the air because the carriage is just a little shifted. I didn't even notice it till I saw it in the edit, and then of course everybody commented on it. But if I just loosened the bolts and shifted the thing, everything would kind of go back in line. Probably from traveling with it. And there we are. We did get a chance to shoot them off at Jerry's farm. And that's what you'll see right now. We go to the farm. And it was a crummy day. It was overcast, and I did some drone shots. The drone was fighting to stay in the air. It was so windy. You see that as soon as that powder just immediately blows away from the wind that was coming across the house. That was a nice shot. And that's Jim Bollinger's big golf ball cannon. Go check out his channel for the build on that. It's really cool. Do Right Fabrication. Thank you for the love and support. I hope you enjoyed this.